Hey, good morning. So we are doing Chaf Amud Aleph today. We're going to start on your Testament base. Before we go to the Gemara that we're up to, I just wanted to point out something that I said yesterday at the top of the page. At the two dots, Tana Rabban Shura Rei Panima Pturav She'ena Rei Panima Chayeves. So we said that when they bury the mace and they're making a shura, and it comes time for Zman Kriyat Shema, so the ones that are next to where the Aval is going to walk, so they're Pater and Kriyat Shema. Now, Rabbi Yehuda said, "Haboim machmas Aval Pturin machmas Atzman Chayavim." If they're coming machmas the Aval, then they're going to be Pater. But if they're coming machmas themselves, then they're Chayav. What does it mean, machmas the Aval? It means that they're coming to give covet to the Aval. Whereas if they're coming machmas Atzman, Rashi says they're coming to see the sights. They want to know the Hak, so then they're Chayav. And I mentioned that it's not so clear from the Gemara. Is Rabbi Yehuda coming to explain that if somebody is mamish inside, so normally he'd be pater, but if he's coming just to see the hak, he's chayev? Or are we saying just in general that if he's further outside, he doesn't see the inside, and nevertheless, if he's coming to pay respects to the other, he'll still be pater? And I said I think probably the first one is more likely, that he's coming and he's on the inside, and nevertheless, he would still be chayev if he had come just to see the action rather than to give cover to the oval. So I found both options in the Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah in the back on over here on the Gemara, I think Yud Aleph from a base in the Daf Erev. So he says essentially he gives both options. He's not machriya particularly, but he gives both options as the way of reading the Gemara. So that was number one. Number two, where we were left off yesterday. I just wanted to review before we go on to the new Gemara, just to review the last bit. So the Gemara told us as follows. We remember the fundamental yesod that we're questioning or challenging is the idea of Hamaitli Kalayim Big Day. Excuse me, if somebody finds Kalayim, somebody finds Shatnez, Daraisa in their clothing, Allah has Paishtan Afilu B'Shuk, that you remove it even in public. My timer. What was the reason for that? The Gemara said, there's no such thing as cheshbainis when it comes to Rebbeinu Shalom. Right? The fact that it might not be necessarily the most coveted for somebody, you don't get covered. When it comes to be violating something like this, a daraisa of kalayim, no covered. The fact that you are wearing shatnez in public doesn't mean that you have a heter to keep on wearing it. You got to take it off. That was the basic idea of the Gemara. The Gemara then challenged that. We had a few ways of challenging it. The first challenge was a situation where it sounded like that you, in order to give cover to the oval, even if he's coming through a basic forest, you go with him. And the Gemara said, no, it's not really a basic forest. That's dealing with a basic Paris, which is only the Rabbanan. So the fact you're giving them the mace covered, the oval covered doesn't signify anything more than that. Then the Gemara said, oh, but what about Blazer Tzaddik? They used to jump over the arenas of Mesim. So you see that they weren't makbid on Daraisa in order to go see a melech. It's important to see melachim, very nice, but you see that they're violating, potentially lo yitama, alav for kahanim. Says no, that's remember what it said. It said Elizabeth said medalgan hayinu al gabe arena shel Mesim and Aaron usually has a chalal tefach, so it's a chatitza between the wall of the aron and the mace, so therefore it stops the tumah from expanding. So therefore, it wasn't really again a deraisa. So you can't learn from this that we're not in keeping with this idea of ein chacham ein tzibun ein etan Hashem. And the Gemara tried again, and the Gemara's next try was this general idea that is used by many of gadol kavod abriyas tzedek lo yisaseh shabbatayra. This idea of gadol kavod abriyas tzedek lo yisaseh shabbatayra. We thought maybe that's a big one. That's going to show you that here's a competing idea which challenges the notion of medalgan, I'm sorry, of kol makom sheyishchil Hashem and chokim kavel harav. That you don't say in chachma and tzibun me'nit neged Hashem because kavod abrius is being definitely listed shebetera. The Gemara says no, that's just talking about lois saser. What does that mean? That's just talking about lois saser. Practically, what that means is that, as we were trying to explain yesterday, was what we got up to, is that loisaser is only referring here to the Rabbanans. And since it's only referring to Rabbanans, yes, it's true that when it comes to Kavod HaBriyos, that we're going to say it's great, and it's going to be Deichel loisaser. But what does it mean that it's being Deichel loisaser? It only means that it's being Deichel Rabbanan. So yesterday we got stopped over here, and I just wanted to review the Rashi again. The fundamental, you said, is the Rashi, and then we'll move on. It says Rashi. So remember, this was Rav Bar Shva, who said this answer, and they laughed at him. If you remember the Gemara said Rav Kahana said Gava Rabbi Amar Milsa Lo Techichula, and I pointed out that Rav Bar Shva was clearly a big guy to Rav Kahana, but in the Gemara before in Yadalid was clearly not such a big deal to Rabbeinu. Remember, this is not Rav Kahana number one or Rav Kahana number two, because they were obviously before Ravina. Ravina is from the last generation of Amoram. Right? Ravina and Rav are the ones who are finishing the Talmud. So what we're talking about here is Rav Kahana, most likely Rav Kahana number three, Rav Kahana de Pumnara, not, or Rav Kahana number four maybe even, but probably Rav Kahana number three, not Rav Kahana number two, who's the famous Rav Kahana. We will come, maybe mention that Rav Kahana again later on today. Okay, so I want to do this Rashi again. So Rashi says as follows. Kol mile derabanan, right? So this is again on the answer of kol mile derabanan. So they're all issues of derabanan. The rabbis were semich on the lav of leisaser. Umishum kavayda ishar rabbanan. We're in your Testament base about a little more than 2/3 of the way down, but we're doing Rashi. Kol mile derabanan. Says Rashi. Kol mile derabanan. It's about halfway down the Rashi. V'alchi kamar lehu. Davar shehumi divrei seifrim. Something that is rabbinic. Nidchem ibnei kavod abriyas. That's going to be pushed aside because of kavod abriyas. The kari le loisasa, and that's called the loisasa mishum nefsiv loisasa, because you have loisasa. Loisasa is an umbrella for all rabbinic enactments. If you're going to violate a rabbinic enactment, we're going to say you're violating loisasa. Udikar kasha lechu, when you're going to ask, I daraisu. Isn't this a daraisa? If you're being soymech, the requirement for everybody to listen to the rabbis on the fact that it says loisaser, so doesn't that make every rabbinic enactment then a daraisa? And if it makes it then a daraisa, so then aren't you in fact ending up showing you that kadol kavod abriyas is doicha real loisasa? In which case, then you don't say what we said before. Ben chachmin tzvud ben etzel neged Hashem. In fact, you are willing to violate a law in the Torah in order to make sure that the kavod abriyas is upkept. Says Rashi, no. Rabbanan achlu likorayu la'avral devreim heichad deika kavod abriyas. The Rabbanan, as it were, make this situation where somebody is being over on quote unquote on their words, where there's kavod abriyas, they're mat to that. They allow for that. They permit for that. That's not going to be an issue. For example, they didn't have sharmin, they had racks that they used to use to clean themselves. So that's okay on Shabbos to metaltal on those racks. If somebody, not a situation where somebody was wearing kalayim, if someone's wearing tzitzis and it snapped, so now he's wearing a arbor canvas, he doesn't have tzitzis on. Does he have to get undressed? Well, he doesn't have to do that. So, in other words, as Rashi is explaining that the fundamental question that we're asking of Gadol Kavod Abriyas B'Torah, maybe that shows you that you don't, in fact, say Ein Chacham Ein Tzvun Ein Etzel Neged Hashem. Maybe, in fact, Kavod Abriyas is going to be Deicha actual Daraisas. So the Gemara is answering no. That's talking about the lav of Leisaser. So we said, what's the big deal? That's still Daraisa. So the Gemara said, no. The lav of Leisaser is really fundamentally, what we're talking about it is in relation to rabbinic enactments. And we're saying is Gadol Kavod Abriyas, that is Deicha a Loisasa Shabbatar of Leisaser, but not literally the Daraisa aspect of it, but rather rabbinic enactments that are being utilized for Leisasor, that is nichlal in the lav, but the rabbis, as it were, moderated their enactment to say that if there's a kavod abriyas situation, then our enactment doesn't apply. So you're not allowed to talk to Lavanim on Shabbos? Sure. But if you need these kind of avanim for your bowel movements, then you can metal those avanim on Shabbos. Gadol covered abrius is doichal not a lois asef loisosor itself. Loisosor remains. But certain rabbinic enactments that are coming under that you have to keep them because of loisosor. Every rabbinic enactment has to be kept because of loisosor. But the rabbis moderated and said they didn't have to apply their enactment in situations where it was covered abrius. So in that sense, it's being deichel loisosor. It's not being deichel a lav of loisosor. It's being deichel the rabbinic enactments that the rabbis applied, which are under the rubric of loisosor. But if that's the case, that's only what's being uprooted at these rabbinic enactments, then the fundamental lav of loisosor still is intact, but also the fundamental point of a chacham mitzvun of an etzel neged Hashem that kol makom that we say sheyesh chol Hashem ein chok and kavel arav, that also remains. That's not being challenged. Okay, is that clear? All right. So now the Gemara says we have another couple of examples on the same point. So Tashma says the Gemara v'salamto mehem. This is talking about again not so much per se pshat in the psukim, but how we dash in the psukim. So when somebody has a lost object, so the pasuk says l'sucha l'salim, you're not allowed to leave it lost. You're right. You have to try to go and help with that lost object. So the Gemara says that v'salam mehem, which again the way we are darshaning that is that you are able to be misalam it. You are able to ignore it. What are the situation? Tashma v'salam mehem pa'amim she'ata misalim mehem. There are times when you are allowed to ignore the lost object. Or pa'amim she'ein atam misalim mehem. There are times that you're not. What are the examples? Kate said, if somebody's a kain and he's walking in a cemetery, right, so he sees a lost object, he's a kain. So he doesn't have to go into the cemetery to get the lost object. Or if somebody is old, right, and it's not he's a Talmud Chacham, and it's not appropriate for him to be going and bending down to get this lost type of object. Or maybe he's a very important person, right? His time is very valuable. So in those situations, the kach nemar v'hisalamta. That's why the Torah says v'hisalamta. In those situations, you're able to ignore it. You're able to ignore this lost object. Amai says the Gemara. What do you mean? You're able to ignore this lost object? Because of the fact that your time is important, because of the fact that you're a zaken, your time to speak fayday. Amai lem ein chachma ve'ein tivuna ve'ein eitel neged Hashem. Why don't you say, like we said before, that you don't give your cheshbainis, oh, your time is really valuable, time is money, and your time is really important, or you're a big rabbi, and no. Say the Hashavas Haveda is very, very important. The Torah says lo yisuch ala salim. You're not chalking kavel arav. You're worried about your covered abrias. It's not important. It's not appropriate for you to go bend down for this lost object. Don't worry about your covered abrias. Ein kol mokim sheish b'chol Hashem ein chalking kavel arav. Say ein chalking mitzvun ve'neitel neged Hashem. We're not worried about your cheshbainis. You do what the Torah says. Why don't we say that? That's the Gemara's question. Why don't, in fact, we say that? So it says the Gemara. So wouldn't this then be, right, a raya? By the kachlam v'salamto, the fact that it says v'salamto, right? Shouldn't that be, if that's the side of what we're saying, then shouldn't that be requiring you to go get the lost object? Elamai, what then would we say at this stage of the Gemara? Maybe this is a proof against it. Every other proof we rejected so far. Maybe this is going to be the one that survives. Gemara says no. Why not? Shani hasam, the v'salamto mehem. Right? It's very clear in Pasuk. Pasuk doesn't say v'salam. V'salam to mehem. We're specifically learning out from these things. You do not have to go, in fact, and violate your own covered abrias to go take this lost object. It's mamish clear in Pasuk. V'salam to mehem. So therefore, Zakeh ben l'fik fayday. Talmud Chacham, right? It's not really for him to go pick this lost object up. To go the covered abrias. So here, covered abrius is coming along, and it's being deichel l'sasher b'Torah. And in fact, it's saying that you don't have to worry about l'suchel l'salim. You don't have to go. If you're a very important person, you're You're a VIP. You don't have to go and pick up the lost object. So the Gemara says, if that's true, then we finally found one that knocks out what we said at the top of the Amud. Right? The top of the Amud we said, so here we have an example. Here we have an example. We say, no, we do think about Chacham and Eitzah Keneged Hashem. Your honor is important. Before, when we try to say God will cover the we end up saying it's only about living Rinnik and Akman to play Sasor. But here we have one. Here's a lav in the Torah and we're violating it. Why? Because a covenant abrius of a guy. So what? So says the more of a ligmar minay. So learn from this now to everywhere else. This should become now our source connected what we said before. Says the Gemara, no. You can't do it. Why? Because the situation of Isser and Mammon. What do you mean Isser and Mammon? Isser and Mammon means, as Rashi says, what does it mean Mammon? Kalma Isura. Where are we going to be more maker? Where are we going to be more machmer? We're going to be more machmer on Isser issues, right? Than on Mammonistic issues. So on this is going to be a situation of Mammonistic issue. So we said the covered abrius of this zaken, they shouldn't have to go to go get this aveda. Okay, no problem. But now you want to go back and say, well, maybe by Kalayim, you should say the same thing. And say, look, the covered abrius of this guy shouldn't have to be dressed naked in the street. So, no. Isura, you're not learning about Issa from Mom. The fact that Mom were more Mako doesn't teach me anything about Issa. Why? Because Issa is Muhammad. We're more Mako on Mom. This is a good question. We're not going to be as Mako on a Mom on an Issa issue. So just because we're Mako over here on the Hashavas Aveda aspect, we're not going to be Mako on the Kalayim aspect. That's the Gemara until now. Good? Now, says the Gemara, and one additional attempt to try to change this up. And the last attempt is from the Sukkim by Nazir. And in order to understand this, we have to first look at Rashi. It's a machlokes here. Between Rashi Taisus. Just we'll say it outside a little bit of the Taisus. It's a big Taisus. But we'll read the Rashi inside. Rashi says as follows. So the Gemara says, Toshma v'la'achoyse. What are we talking about? So look at Rashi. V'la'achoyse matam, right? Everybody has the Rashi. B'nazir ksiv. Kol yemei haziroi l'Hashem. Al nefesh meish lo yavoi. Right? In Nazir, it says that all of the days of the Naziris, he cannot become Tameh. Right? Kol yemei haziroi l'Hashem. Al nefesh meish lo yavoi. He cannot become a Tameh meis during the times that he's a Nazir. V'samach lei. But it's right next to the pasuk says, but it also says that you're not able to become tummy to your father, to your mother, to your brother, to your sister. But I don't understand. What's the problem? You already just said, if you already said that you can't become tummy to any soul, then by definition that means your mother, your father, your brother, your sister. So why are we coming along and being pirate them? Why are we being specifying them and making it clear that we're talking about all of these as well? They're all included within that. So then why does it come out and especially specify the father? Coming to exclude a mace mitzvah. That is to say, when you said in pasuk al nefesh meis lo yavai, so you would think, okay, you're not able to become tummy to regular people. Now it's saying you're not able to become tummy to your fathers. So, well, regular people, and then includes the fathers. So why do I have to tell you fathers? We're telling you father that your father you can't become tummy to, even your father, not just any regular people, even your father you can't become tummy to. But there is an exception. What's the exception? If somebody doesn't have anybody to be burying them, then you also become tummy to that person. Okay, so now if I know that you can't become tummy to regular people, to your family, to nobody, so then l'imay, what does that have to say to mother? You already know you can't be tummy to the father. What about the mother? L'imay ma tamud lemar mishum meis mitzvah. Because of meis mitzvah, I already know that. Like Itzrach, the milah of nafka, I already know that from the father. So then what's the need for the Dimafar, not the mother? Because This is coming to teach you not just a regular person, that he can't become tummy to regular people. He can't become tummy to his parents. No, he could become tummy to a mace mitzvah. Now we're saying, so why do I have to even fire the mother? I already know you can't become tummy to family. No, now we're telling you that it's not just a regular nazir. It's a nazir who's a kayan. The Havila Shtei Kedushas. So now he's not able to become tummy, not just because he's a nazir. Now he's also not able to become tummy because he's a kayan. So then, if that's the situation, and there's two kedushas, so then I'm telling you, you can't become tummy even to your mother, but for a mace mitzvah, you could become tummy. So then Mar said over there, so the afid matam laimar. So then what about the brother? Why not to explain the brother? There ain't no parents, so of course you're not able to become tummy to the brother. It's not just now a nazir or kain; it's another kain gadol. And we're saying even over there, you can become tamei to your family members, but you couldn't become tamei to a mace mitzvah. I should point out the Rav Nissen brings down a bit of a different understanding as to like the father and the mother, that there might be differences. You might not necessarily think by definition that if you become one thing, it said the father and for sure the mother. He says that you could make the argument on the one side, well, the father is where you get your yichus from. And obviously, if you can't become tummy to the father, of course you can't become tummy to the mother. But it says, no, the mother also has a chomidik aspect. It wouldn't be necessary from the father, you would learn out. What's the mother's chomidik aspect? Is that when the mother is the vadois, that she's your mother. But your father is only your father, mitzvah chazaka. So it could be that if it said your mother, you wouldn't know your father. So you have to say both. Okay. Doesn't necessarily explain about the brother and the sister. Either way, the idea is that we had it possibly by Nazir was clear. That I'll never shmesh you're not able to become tamei to people. But then the Torah is explained, father, mother, brother, sister. So we explain why does it have to be fired all this when I would know that pashut that you can become tamei to people generally. So he said no, it's coming to teach you a Nazir can become tamei to a mace mitzvah, and even if he's a kain, and even if he's a kain gadol. So now we're left with the last one, which is why does it say sister? That you're not able to become tamei to your sister. So then, explains Rashi, so why did I have to explain sister? So Rashi says, so now we're talking about a person that's going to be shoched the Korban Pesach. So in other words, it's not a situation merely of a person that's going on the road, that is a Nazir Kohen, or Nazir Kohen Gadol. Now we're talking about somebody who's going on the way to shech the Korban Pesach, going on the way to do a bris milah. And there we're saying as well that such a person is able to mitama to a mace mitzvah. I should point out this is where the machlokes between Rashi and Tosfos is. Rashi says lemi shahaylat, right, to who is going. But if you look at Tosfos, in the bottom Tosfos, Tosfos says Mnei koyal adam shehu nazir v'kohen gadol v'ayis Pesach, right? In the Gemara, if you look at the Gemara, I suppose you're going to read it in a second, the Gemara is not 100% mashma that we're talking here about a kain anymore. Even though if you look at the Gemara over there, but the Gemara is darshing this whole thing in Nazir, you'll see that it's talking about Nazir, a kain gadol, etc. Here, with this last case of V'la Chaisai, we don't specify that we're talking about a kain. Does that mean that we were still talking about a kain because that's what we were talking about before? Or we're talking about a regular person, a regular Nazir? We're going back to a regular situation of a Nazir, and we're telling you an additional point. If somebody had actually a mitzvah to do, a mitzvah that has chiyuv of kares with it, if you don't do it, or we're talking here not just about a Nazir, but it's still a Nazir kain who has this mitzvah to do. That is a machlokes here. Can't get into more than that right now. But just to again go through the Gemara, Tashma, right? So the pasuk tells us, and we already explained that already was Mefaret the father and the mother and the brother, and now we're up to the sister. Ma Talmud Loimar. What's the reason why he's telling us about the sister? Somebody's going to Shechon Pesach. He's going to be Malas Kivish. And he hears that he has a situation of a family member who passed away. So you think maybe you should go be Matama to them. No, I'm a slave You're not able to be Matama to them. So you might think just because you can't go Matama to them, he maybe also shouldn't be able to become tamid to a mace mitzvah. Talmud loim v'la'achayse. Telling us v'la'achayse, la'achayse u'deina mitame or chafam at aleph. Ava mitame u'lemeis mitzvah, but he is mitame to a mace mitzvah. So the Gemara says, so this person again, who may be a kain or maybe just be a regular nazir, meaning a nazir kain or just a regular nazir who is going out to be mal his son, or is going out to be bring karm kesef, which have karas associated with it. If you don't do that, so in such a situation, you might think that he could be if he has if he has a family member that becomes tamei, then maybe he should become tamei. No, you don't become tamei to that. However, if he has a mace mitzvah, even though he has a karas associated mitzvah, he violates that. He does not do that. He goes takes care of the mace mitzvah. That'll make him not tamei mace. He can't be the Karm Pesach. No matter. No matter. What do you see from that? If somebody's being mitamid to a mace mitzvah, then as Rashi says, "V'hu covered abrias, v'derech davar v'derech v'Torah." So now you see again a situation of covered abrias is coming along with something from the Torah. So if it's coming along with something from the Torah, then again you have another source for God covered abrias is derech leisa sesha b'Torah. Here the law is I'll never mace lo yavai. If he's a kohen, he has additional situation, and he has now a charistic aspect of Karm Pesach. So you see how great it is, and now you can learn it out. So previously, when it came to the situation of Shabbos Aveda, we said it's true. There is an aspect where you that, but it's limited because that's just by moment, so you can't learn it out to Isser. Before by Loisasser, okay, it's true, but it's only by Dirabbanans, which are coming under Loisasser. So now what about this one? This is big Daraisas, Chiv Karis. So the Gemara says, so maybe over here. So the Gemara says, Amai, right? So you see clearly, you don't say that. And what we have is a fundamental idea that you do able to be covered abrias for these for this situation of a mace mitzvah. Says the Gemara, no, shiny hasam the civil achaisai. It said in the pasuk v'la achaisai. That's the heter, because it says v'la achaisai. So therefore, we have a heter in this situation. So you're right. Covered abrias is coming along and being doichem. We're not saying Hashem. We're coming along and saying the covered abrias of this mace mitzvah is important enough that it's going to be doicha the iser karis of not bringing the Karm Pesach. Sure. We acknowledge that. So we now have a great example. So let's learn this out to Kol Torah Kula, says the Gemara. But the Gemara, again, same question. So let's learn this out to Kol Torah Kula. Says the Gemara, no, we can't do that. Because Shev Val Taisa shiny. There's a Shev Val Taisa over here. What's the Shev Val Taisa? Over here, a person's being passive. We have to run through this Rashi because it's a fundamental Rashi. Rashi says, there are many things that the Torah was matter a person to be aiker from the Torah because of a siyag or because of covered abrias. Where you're not actually doing something. You're sitting in place with Vartar Nekar Me'elav, and it's coming along of its own and being aiker. You're going to get shofar. So we. Right, we're Iker, a mitzvah in the Torah of Tkiyah Shofar. Right, we say we're not going to be doing Tkiyah Shofar. We're afraid of people carrying on Shabbos, right, or lulav, etc. In that situation, when are we being Iker that be a daim? Are we being Iker that be a daim when somebody is not blowing Shofar on Shabbos? The answer is no. We say that's the Shavuot Taisa. You're not picking up the Shofar. You weren't. It's not as comparable to the situation of Kilayim, where somebody put on Kilayim. And he's literally walking around with a lav in the Torah. In that situation, we're not going to learn from this. Here, we want to say that it's a situation of a person not being able to be in the Karm Pesach, saying yes, but it's a Sheva al Taisa. Now, the question is, can that be sustained? Let's look at Rashi. So Rashi says, someone who's wearing Kalayim, he's literally putting on Kalayim. So that's not a Sheva al Taisa. So Rashi's bothered. Because what are we saying over here? We're saying that this is a situation of a Shev al Tais. That's what the Gemara said. That's why we can't learn out to anything else. Only to other Shev al Taises, but not to anything which is Biyadayim. Which our situation, if somebody's Moitzi Kalayim a big day, that's a situation of Biyadayim. Says the Gemara, says Rashi, "V'tumas gufa shehutru lekayin lenazir litma lemeis mitzvah." The kama akav yadayim, they covered our brias. The lav shebal taisu. So Rashi's bothered. I don't understand. How could you say this is shebal taisa in our situation of our Gemara? You're going to the meis mitzvah. You're going to be in the time. You're picking him up. That's not a shebal taisa. Yes, it's shebal taisa in the sense that you're not going to the Beis Hamikdash to bring the Korban Pesach, or you're not going to the Moel's house to bimal your son. But it's not shebal taisa with regards to you actually going to the meis mitzvah, picking him up and putting him in the grave. What's the shebal taisa there? You hear the question? Fundamental. How is it a shebal taisa? Says Rashi. Rashi tries. Taisa disagrees. We won't be able to see Taisa inside. We'll just read Rashi. Rashi says, it's not a shebal taisa. Hainu taima do like amina minei the hasam lav mishum kavod abrias hu the dachi lav loisa sedida the meikar kishen nichtav loisa sed the tuma loy al meis mitzvah nichtav kishem shloi nichtav ala krivim. You hear Rashi's like, Kvetch, Rashi's trying to tell you that this is not going to be matama to the meis mitzvah is not a situation of being oiker biyadayim the lav. Yes, it's said in pasuk, I'll never shmeis lo yavai, and you're going to meis mitzvah and literally pick him up, putting him a thing. But that's not a situation of biyadayim being oiker. You know why? Because when the Torah said, that is, by definition, the Torah taking it out of meis mitzvah, out of that. So you're not being accurate. The pasuk itself, when it said la'aviv, excludes meis mitzvah. So you're not being accurate by you going to the meis mitzvah. It was already accurate inside the pasuk. So therefore, you went to go and become tamei. So now you're tamei. So now you're shebal taisa. You can't be bringing the Korban Pesach. You can't go along and be mal your child anymore because you're busy with the meis mitzvah. In that sense, that's your shebal taisa. Shebal taisa is not you're going to be burying this person, because that burying of the person was given to you permission by the very pasuk itself. Says Taisus, what are you talking about? if that's not called shebal taisa, because of the fact that if that's not called being oiker b'yadayim, because of the fact that the Torah was already excluding it for you, then say that about every mitzvah. Every time you have any mitzvah, the Torah is going to say one thing over the other and say, well, it's not you being doichet. It was already excluded in the Torah. So Torah says, I can't accept that this is the reason. We don't have the time to go see it inside. But I'll just tell you outside. The Torah says the reason what we can't learn out from here is either one of two reasons, says Torah. The Torah says shebal taisa. So on the bottom, Torah says, you know why this whole nazir thing is not being learned out? When the Gemara says shebal taisa shiny, what it's trying to say is the mala nazir sheken yeshna mishela. It's not a word of shebal taisa. According to Taisus, that's not the fundamental point. The point is we can't learn anything out of nazir. You know why? Because nazir is yeshna b'she'ela. A nazir could stop his naziris, right? In theory, not every nazir necessarily, but in theory, a nazir could stop his naziris. So it's not really so deeply fundamental, and therefore we're more makel. That's effectively what Torah says. The second answer of Torah is, maybe you can't learn anything out from Kain. This case talking about Kain, because remember what I said is that Rashi says Lemi. Rashi says this whole case could be talking about a regular Nazir. Torah says no, it's probably talking about a Kain who's a Nazir. So you can't learn anything from Kain because Kain is not related. It's not relatable. It's only specifically for Kahana. But a fundamental dispute between Rashi and Taisus as to understanding when I say the idea that the Nazir is able to be matama to meis mitzvah, am I saying over there that that's shebal taisa, or am I saying that is being the shebal taisa is only going on the fact that once I'm tamei, I'm sitting and not being able to go do the Korban Pesach, or I missed my time of being mal my son on the 8th day because I was busy with the meis mitzvah, and that's the shebal taisa. Right, seems to be the Taisa says you can't say that that's a shebal. That's not a shebal taisa. When you're going and actually, literally, physically being matama, you're clearly being argued b'yadayim. I said, actually, no, you're not being argued b'yadayim anything, because the Torah said v'la'chaisa. So lima lava v'la'chaisa, etc. We're learning out that is being excluded. Since that's being learned out, That's not a situation where you're being Eiker b'yadayim. I hope that's clear. So now we have to move on quickly through the rest of the Gemara here, but this is now Agadah Gemara. Says the Gemara as follows. So what is the connection of this Gemara? So the Amar Rav Papa Abaya, Ma'ishna Rishon Disrakshu Nisa, Ma'ishna Anan Delim Disrakshu Nisa. Why did the early generations get Nisim? We don't get Nisim. What do you mean? Why don't we get Nisim? So Imishom Tanuya, if it's because of the fact of learning, maybe they learned better than us. No, but Shnani the Rabbi Huda Kula Tanai ben Atikin Hava. In those days they were very learned in Atikin. But I'm not coming thin in Sidra, but we Mamish, we learn all Sidra. We were much more learned than them. If we look at Rashi here, Rashi says in the Rashi ben Atikin Hava. I want to skip to the end of Rashi. Rashi says, we're talking until now about somebody who's mevazah themselves for Kedushas Hashem, right? In the situation of Kalayim to become naked because you're wearing Kalayim. Livshay Kalayim Bashuk, right? Somebody's being mevazah themselves and Kedushas Hashem in order to take off the shanis that they're wearing in the shuk. So we're going to talk over here also about being mevazah oneself. And that's the segue of the Gemara. So I thought to point out, because I didn't point it out yesterday, that when the Rambam brought down the halacha in Kalayim, from Moitze Kalayim b'Vigdai, Poishin Afilu B'Shuk, we didn't explain so fundamentally clearly. But there's a machlekes here between the way Rashi is learning the Rambam, the Rosh, the Rif, etc. What does it mean? Moitze Kalayim b'Vigdai, Poishin Afilu B'Shuk. Listen to the way the Rambam brought it down. The Rambam brings down Haroya Kalayim Shal Torah al Chaveroi. Afilu Haya Mahalach B'Shuk Kofetz Loi V'Kara Olav Miyad. Afilu Haya Rabbi Shlam Dechachma. She'ein Kavod Abrias Derech Iser Lo Yisasem Push B'Torah. What's the difference? What's the difference between the Rashi and the Rambam? Someone else. What are we talking about when you're ripping off Kalayim on the person? On yourself or on somebody else? The Rambam's clear. We're talking about somebody else. Of course, on yourself, obviously. We're talking about someone else. But from Rashi, that wasn't clear. From the Gemara, when you read the Gemara, it's not so clear that that's what we're talking about. So, in any event, just to put that as an aside, that this is the context of the Gemara. And from Rashi, you wouldn't have necessarily seen that as much as when you see it over here again, where Rashi makes it clear that what we're talking about is Mevisha Mevaze Atzmoi Akdushat Hashem. He's being mevazah himself. Okay, so see, continues the Gemara. In those days, they learned way less than we learn today. So why did they get nisim? Rabbi Yehuda was learning uksa, so he would say the Mishnah, a woman who's cooking a vegetable, and maybe she was cooking olives with their leaves, to the hiram. So he would be confused. He said, Omar, Abayis, the Rabbi Shmuel Kachazina. He would say, like, oh my gosh, the big shaylas, as Rashi explains, the big questions of Rav and Shmuel, I'm seeing over here. In other words, it's complicated. We have 13 different mesiftas. So again, here, the difference between Rashi and Taisus. Is it 13 different yeshivas, or maybe 13 different approaches? Rashi says different approaches. They had different things that they learned on this. So either way, we're way more learned than they were. And when Rabbi Yehuda would literally take off his shoes to daven for rain, he would start raining. And we, mamash, we're crying, kvetching for rain, nothing happens. We are not Moshe Nefesh for Kedushas Hashem, and they were. They did Kiddush Hashem, they were Moshe Nefesh. And now we have example of what was the situation. Maybe this was a raya to the Rambam. Here's the situation. She was wearing some sort of a red dress, right? As we pointed out in the Mseres Hashas. It's a big beged Edom can go in karbal to the Tana girl, right? That's the Gemara that we had in Zion of Nalf before when Kodesh Baruch Hu became angry. So she was wearing a red dress over the Bas Yisrael. He thought she was a Jewish girl, and it was inappropriate. That's this. So come Karminei. So he ripped it off her. So, literally what our example was. They go most of the kusis. It turned out she was a kusis, and they'd find him for embarrassing a Shami Bar Me'ezuzeh, Amalei Mashamak, he said, what's your name? Amrullah Matun. So Amrullah Matun, Matun, Avmea Zuzi Shavi. He caused me a loss of 400 zuz. In other words, Rashi has two options. Either Matun, it sounds like, Masayim, and Matun is 400, or Matun, I should have just waited and had patience, and then I would have saved myself $400. Either way, what you see from here is clear that they had a situation of serious nefesh. They had a situation of somebody who was willing to take on themselves potentially liability in order to mikashem shemayim. Again, the same idea of Einchach min tfuna eitzim naged Hashem. Where we're going to rip off kalayim off you, even your Rebbe, the Rambam Paskins. Here you see in Maisa, with Adam Barava was ripping off the clothing off the kusitz. If you remember the Gemara in Ham base, when Rav Huna had his wine turned to vinegar, the Rav Adam Barava, according to one of the versions of the Gemara, they came and said, "L'ayim Arav Milsim, you should check out what you did wrong." In other words, they weren't shy about stressing their opinion. Okay, now we have again two Gemaras. What's the connection of these Gemaras? Again, clearly people going in public and not being ashamed to make their opinions clear if they thought it was the right thing to do. But this time, it's unbelievable. These two Gemaras are unbelievable. It says the Gemara of Gidl have a ruggled have a cause of Yosef Shared Tefillah. Rav Gidl will go sit by the gates of the mikvah. This is how you have to be careful yourself. Aren't you afraid of the Yitzhara? They seem to me like white geese. This reminds us of the Gemara in Ksubas. I think more in Ksubas Yadzayin. The Gemara tells us there about a meiser of Acha would go with the cows on his shoulders, and he said because they're like a kakar, they're like beams. I don't notice. So he would go there to answer them questions on Hilchos Tefillah, and he had no worries about the Yetzer Hara. I make a joke. The Gemara in Yivam Samachdal tells us that Rav Gidl was a yaker from the long shiurim of the Gemara over there says from the long shiurim of Rav Huna. So maybe that was a cause for why he wasn't have to be afraid from the Yitzhar, but that's not the answer of the Gemara. Okay. Rav Yechon will also go sit in the gates of the Tefillah. They should look at me, the girls, because I'm very handsome. The Gemara because he had no beard, he was very handsome. He could be thought of as a woman. Rish Lakish jumped in the yard, and after they should have children that are as good looking as me. It's funny, the Gemara Bamasi also says not just Shapir Kavasai, but also says that they should be as learned as me. So the Amalur Rabban like Stop from Army and the Beach, are you not afraid of Ayin Hara? So Amalu Anam is Ardi Yosef seen the Shot the Beach. He says, I'm from the tribe of Yosef, and there's no Ayin Hara. So this is again a fascinating Bach. Normally when you have the Bach is coming to give you emendations, right? In Shas. But this here is a long Bach, has nothing to do with an emendation. He's asking a question. He says, why is it that Rav Gidl we asking a kasha of Yetzer Hara, and Rav Yechon we're asking a kasha of Ayin Hara? Why don't we ask each one the other one? So he says for Rav Yochanan, we were not worried about Yetzer Hara because his eyebrows were all over his eyes. I don't think at that time, and he brings something more about in Baba Mitzir and Baba Kam Kufiyat Zayin about when Rav Kahana came and escaped Rav, the whole thing. That's Rav Kahana number 2. That's not the Rav Kahana that we were talking about before on your test. This is Rav Kahana came to Eretz Yisrael because he had killed somebody who was a meiser, a whole very fascinating Gemara. Anyhow, the point is that Rabbi Yochanan, at that very old age, when his eyebrows were very over his eyes, I'm not sure that was the time when he was saying that they should come look at him. I don't think that was when he was so handsome. I think this was much earlier in his life when he was so handsome. So I can't understand this box. But okay, put that on the side. The other side of it, what about the other way around? What does it mention about Rav Gidl that he's now afraid about Ayin Hara? So he says that the difference is, if looking more carefully, more to Rabbi Yochanan, that he wants them to be mistakil by him, to look inside his face. Whereas Rav Gidl, no, they're just coming to ask Shilas. Now, how do you know that there was no Ayin Hara for Yosef? The Siv and Purse, Yosef and Purse on the Ayin. What does it mean that it was by the spring? The Elo Ayin, it was above the eyes. Yosef didn't have Ayin Hara. Rabbi Yosef, that's from the bracha that Yaakov gave Yosef. A different part. This is the bracha that Yaakov gave Ephraim and Menashe. That they should be fruitful, the karva arts, but like dogim, the yidgu, even though it's not talking about fish, it's talking about the children of Ephraim and Menashe. Children, my dogim should be on mechasen, my mechasen alim, ayin har shaledes b'hem, avzer sheyos, and ayin har shaledes b'hem. Just like by fish, there's no ayin har, so to our children of Yosef, there'll be no ayin har. Lastly, by saying a third answer, ayin l'shleirotzel osam mimash, ayin shaloi, ayin ayin har shaledes b'hem. Just like Yosef wasn't going to be satisfied, satiating himself from what didn't belong to him, meaning Ashes Pertivar, so too the Ayin Hara is not going to affect them. So 3 different possibilities of why the family of Yosef doesn't have ayin hara, and for all practical intents and purposes, what that means is that there's no ayin hara by the family of Yosef, which means then there are Rabbi Yochanan who says he's coming from the family of Yosef. How could he know? Didn't the family of Yosef, didn't they get lost after the 10 tribes? Unfortunately, we can't discuss anymore. Have a wonderful day.